In 3, 2, 1. This is Acting Mastery. I'm Ben Matthews. Today we're thrilled to bring you an incredibly insightful conversation with one of Australia's most exciting writer-directors, Yolanda Ramke. Yolanda first captured international attention with her short zombie film, Cargo, which she co-wrote and co-directed with Ben Howling. That short film, originally made for Tropfest, went viral and was praised by the likes of Simon Pegg. It went on to become a feature-length Netflix original film starring Martin Freeman. Following the success of Cargo, Yolanda was tapped by the creator of The Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan, to direct pivotal episodes of his follow-up series for Netflix, The Haunting of Bly Manor. She also went on to create the ABC TV series, Troppo. In this episode, recorded during one of our industry talk nights here in Sydney, we discuss how Yolanda broke into the industry, what it was like pitching to Hollywood, working with actors like Martin Freeman, her own creative process, and why creating your own work might just be the most powerful move an artist can make. Please join me in welcoming Yolanda. This is your life.
It's the weirdest thing ever when people read your biography at you.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
But Yol, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
I thought I'd begin by, well, first of all, I don't think I've ever asked you this question. How did you initially get involved in the film and television industry? I know, and we'll talk about this, that you for a while there were interested in being, or you were an actor.
I was. That was the game plan. Yeah. I'm sure, like many of you here, it was sort of like that was the dream. You know, like as a younger person, and then I think. Yeah, it was an interesting thing. I think it was just sort of coming out of high school. You obviously inevitably come to that crossroads of what is the next step from there. And for me, there was sort of a course that was going at a university that I was looking at that was kind of like a film screen production degree that also let you like minor in theatre. And so it sort of felt like it was ticking all of the boxes for me at that time. And so, yeah, kind of stepped into that in a way, like with acting very much being the thing that I thought was what I wanted to do, but always loving film and television and just sort of being kind of really obsessed with that, but not consciously having the thought that could be a career, because I don't think I was fully cognizant of that. And I grew up in like kind of regional Australia, so I didn't know anybody that did that kind of thing, and it wasn't really in my kind of on my radar. But yeah, I mean, sort of did basically a 3-year film school degree, and then came out of there being like, this is very much like something that I love, and the writing, directing side of it really sparked for me as well while I was there. And then it was, you know, kind of taking the sort of fledgling steps that a lot of people take when they come out of film school, working as an intern. I did my first 3-month internship on like H2O Just Add Water. I don't know if any of you are young enough to know that banger of a show. But it was so exciting because it was like, you know, it was a kind of like a YA show, but you know, you were seeing prosthetics and you were seeing like visual effects and like stuff like that most Australian shows weren't doing at that time. Right. So it was kind of a really exciting and kind of a really gentle set to kind of step into as a, you know, baby, like 21-year-old.
Wow. And
the first kind of internship on that show was actually in the costume department. And for me, that was like not something that I was in any way adept at or interested in pursuing, but it was kind of, I knew it would get me on a set for 3 months and it would just give me that sort of like grounding to get that sort of initial view of like how a set operates and to get an understanding of how those different departments kind of intersect. And then, yeah, I guess it was just sort of like springboarding from that to a behind-the-scenes career in a bunch of different drama shows, a lot of reality TV in roles, everything from a runner to like production secretary to post-production, like art department, a little bit more costume, like whatever jobs I could get effectively. For about 7 years. That was sort of the bill paying, the way that I paid my bills by day whilst, doing what you guys are doing, which is taking acting classes, you know, on my weekends or in my after hours, writing short films like on my weekends and making those with friends and showreel scenes and all the stuff I'm sure a lot of you are doing. And then Cargo was the sort of thing that I guess allowed Ben Howling and I, my friend and co-director on that film, to kind of get that first foot in the door that got the ball rolling. And there was still plenty of like working odd jobs throughout that process before the feature. It was sort of like a 3-year process from the short to the feature.
I want to get into that in a minute. But so where in regional Australia did you grow up?
We moved around a little bit. It was Western Australia for a minute, but mostly central Queensland. So kind of like pretty out in the bush. Which was kind of like, it's funny because like I look back on it now and it's like when you're a kid you don't really know what you're missing out on in a way.
Right.
And now I look back on it and I'm kind of like, oh, it's probably a really good thing that happened in terms of it just forced you to have an imagination, because there was no cinema, there wasn't a lot of like extracurricular things to do, so it was a lot of imaginary backyard games and kind of maybe that was helpful. I don't know. Watched a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. Yeah.
And where did you go to film school?
I went to Griffith Film School in Brisbane.
Yep.
Which was cool, and it's one of those things. I don't know if you might have had a similar experience as well, Ben, with the film school thing, but it's like it certainly gives you an amazing like foundational understanding of how things kind of work, but it's like maybe like 40%, like, you know, once you're out on a set, whether you've had that background or not, like that's where you're kind of really learning. Totally. Or it's like self-educating in terms of what you're reading, books you're reading, screenplays you're reading. You know, I don't think it's a necessity that you go to film school. I think it gives you a good base knowledge, which is great, and I think it gives you sometimes, you know, one of the big things obviously is a network or peers that you can then come up with and make things with. Yeah. But there's lots of different ways to kind of come at it.
Did you know when you started acting that you also wanted to write and direct, or were you just focused on acting at the outset?
I think it was a bit of both, but I think I probably hit that sort of epiphany point that, again, I imagine a lot of you guys are feeling right now, is that thing of like seeing how hard it was going to be to kind of be seen, to get to test for the kinds of things you'd like to be seen for, or to be seen in the light you'd like to be seen for. And so that idea of, well, if I take charge and I generate material of my own, maybe then I can like write myself the role that I can then put on my show reel that can be like, I can do this. But what kind of happened, I didn't really notice, but a friend pointed out to me, he's like, do you know that when you write these scenes and we go shoot them, you always write yourself like the little side character that has like 2 lines and you're never really the main person? And I was like, oh, no, I didn't really notice that. And definitely, like, I feel like writing was always something I had loved and done as a child as well. And so maybe that should have been a sign that like I was starting to inch towards that direction. But I mean, really it was sort of in a way by nature of the fact that the behind the scenes side of things took off first.
Right.
And there was a bit of a freight, like hold on to the freight train, let's see where this goes element to that. And yeah, that just was sort of the thing that went and kind of just sort of followed it, I guess. Yeah.
Part of the reason I wanted to interview you was because it's something that we're always advocating for at this school, is create your own opportunities, create your own work. That really, you know, I'm often saying there are really 3 pillars to an actor's career. There's craft, mindset, and opportunity. And usually if something is missing in one of those areas, well, that's when actors are not necessarily producing the results that they would like to produce, because something's either missing in terms of craft, mindset, or opportunity. And certainly to take the bull by the horns and to actually empower yourself by learning to write and direct is another way. It's just another way in, and such an empowering way in. Yeah. Was Cargo your first short film, or you said you'd already been writing showreel scenes to put yourself in?
Yeah, I think because at that time the thinking was more about that platforming, the acting thing. It was a little bit more bite-sized, show real sceney stuff, just to not overshoot the runway, and also work within your means and what you had access to. But prior to Cargo, I had written a short film, another short film that got some funding, and this was kind of, it's one of those things as well where, like, because as a writer, I think acting's very similar. It's sort of like, you're just sort of looking for somebody to give you that little bit of a nudge of like, hey, like, you might have some facility to do that. Like, you might have an ability there that you just a little nudge of like, hey, keep exploring that. And I think for me, interestingly enough, actually, I was doing one of the sort of open program 6-month courses at NIDA back in the day, and I had a tutor there who was very kind, and we were just talking about, you know, short film making, and he was about to make a feature, and it was all, you know, it was all very impressive. And I had just mentioned in passing I was working on a short film script and didn't in any way ever expect him to, would never have asked him to read it.
Right.
But he offered, and I was like, oh, that's so kind. And so I shared it with him, and he really reacted to it in a way that surprised me. It was very positive, and to the point that he was like, I'll act in it with you, because he was also an actor. And I was like, oh my God, this is sort of, you know, so that was that little nudge that I think that I needed from an industry professional at that time, to be like, keep exploring this, like don't sort of put that down, you might be onto something. And that sort of led to, that ended up becoming a short film that I ended up just writing and acting in, and it ended up being a different actor that stepped in. So I had a writing credit that had got some funding from Metro Screen. I don't think that's around anymore, but it used to be. It was so great.
Yeah,
they used to have, basically it was like a $15,000 grant that you could like apply for, and they would pick a project every year, and we were lucky enough to get that. So I had
for Cargo.
So no, so this was for a previous film,
right?
And I think there was that was sort of my first run on the board as a writer, and then coming out of that, it was that thing of, oh, I would really like to, the next thing I write, have a bit more of a sense of authorship over, and like direct it as well, to kind of carry a creative idea through.
You didn't direct that one?
I didn't, no,
right.
no.
Yeah.
And so, and that was sort of how Cargo came about. So not a lot behind me at that point, but yeah.
I think one of the things that was so impressive about Cargo, and I want to hear about, I guess, where that idea came from, is that it's a genre film. And it's not only a genre film, it's a high concept genre film. Do you want to let everyone know what the pitch is for Cargo? It's really the short and the feature.
The short. Well, it's probably, yeah, it's interesting. I guess in terms of like the premise of the film, we had a group of us got together because we wanted to sort of make a short film, and we were trying, it was right at the time that The Walking Dead was in its early days, so it was sort of like pre-zombie burnout. But we were loving it, and we were like, oh my God, if we were to like make a zombie film, like how would we, like what could we do that might give us a point of difference in that sort of post-apocalyptic space? And Ben and I still to this day like playfully argue with each other about whose idea it actually was, but one of us came up with the idea of, it was just like an image of a zombie with a baby on its back. And we were kind of like, oh, okay, like it's this sort of predator with this very fragile little creature, and like what could we do with that? And that was sort of the genesis of the project. So effectively the short is about a father who has been bitten from the very start of the film, and has a very short window to try and deliver his child to safety before he turns into this, you know, predator and becomes a threat to his child.
It's an amazing. I rewatched Cargo in preparation for this short the other day, and I mean it's just so concise and well executed, and you get straight into it, and the stakes are immediately clear. I just think it was a very smart idea to think about genre in approaching a short film, and I guess what was your thinking that went into that? It was just that you were a big fan of The Walking Dead. I think we actually met at a workshop.
Yes, we did, yeah.
With the showrunner of The Walking Dead.
That's right.
When he was in Australia.
We
That's
did.
right,
Yeah, I think it's just it's like that classic writing like platitude, where it's like write what you know, but it's also not that I mean, obviously I haven't lived through a zombie apocalypse, but it's like write what you love, like write the thing that like you want to see, and that's what we did. Like it was, that's all it was. It was kind of like, and there could have been a bunch of different things that we might have explored, but I think the idea of being able to find somebody that had like makeup artists that could do prosthetic zombie stuff was like, oh, that'd be cool. Like it'd be cool to have some prosthetics in the film, and like, yeah, I think it was, and also just something that like felt like it had like a bit of like stakes to it, like a bit of like drama. And I think, to be fair as well, like in the end it became we sort of quite specifically were looking to make that film for Tropfest.
Right.
And so that meant that we knew we had a 7-minute maximum running time. So that's really like gives you really clear constraints from the get-go.
Fantastic.
7 minutes, and you had to have like a signature item, and that year it was a balloon.
Balloon, yeah.
And everything else was, was there a line of dialogue? I can't remember. No, I don't think so. I think it was just a signature item. Yeah. And so we knew that we had 7 minutes to tell the story, and there was probably an element. I mean, I'm not a comedy. I mean, I love comedy, but I don't. That's not the thing that I would write, because it's not where I feel like my skill set is.
Right.
But I think we were also conscious that with Tropfest, there were sort of two streams of the kinds of films that they would accept into that festival, and it was either like the really dark emotional drama, or something that's a bit darker, or it's like the really out and out comedy. And we're like, well, I can't do that. So like, we're gonna do this thing. And also it felt like there were less of the darker things. So I think we kind of thought, if we go that direction, maybe there's less competition.
Right, yeah.
That was about as strategic as we got. But more than anything, just like write the thing that you want to write. And as for actors, like write the thing you want to act in, like write the role that you want to be.
And you acted in it.
I did.
Really well, I have to say. I was rewatching it going, she's really good.
Yet again, like the side character that comes in at the end,
Sure.
like not the main guy.
Yeah, no, you weren't the main.
I was like, I'm not going to play that guy.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I guess it would work. It would have worked with the mother as well. Could have worked with the mother. For sure. And so you made it for Tropfest. It didn't win, but it did. I mean, I remember seeing it at Tropfest, and I think for me it was the most memorable film that night. It really then found its audience online.
Yeah.
So what happened? What was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so Tropfest had their own YouTube channel, so they put up all of their finalist films the next day. Yeah, it was kind of, I think the next day was probably like, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20,000 people like watched the films, and it was kind of all the people, because at Tropfest, I don't know, like some of you guys are probably too young to have, but it was like,
some of you not know what Tropfest is.
I'm like, this is harrowing. Can I just see a raise of hands who has never been to a Tropfest? Jesus!
I know,
really?
I feel suddenly so
my
old.
God.
Maybe we need to explain Tropfest.
Tropfest was like the biggest rock concert you could imagine for short films.
It
like
really
it was like, you felt like a celebrity.
Absolutely.
And the viewership was insane. Like you'd have like 100,000 people come to watch 16 short films. Like there's no other platform in the world.
At the Domain in the city. People would bring picnics, sit on the grass and watch a night of short films, and the winners would do incredibly well out of it. Everybody would be talking about it. It literally started out in the Tropicana Cafe in King's Cross, and then every year it just got bigger and bigger until they needed a park to support all of the people that were coming. And every year they would have a different signature item that let the audience know that they had made the film specifically for Tropfest.
Yeah.
And just to get into the finals is a huge
so they'd
honor.
take like 16 films basically, like on the night, and
out of thousands of
probably like
a
lot of and so everyone, they were all 7 minutes, so like as an audience watching, you're getting these really bite-sized stories. It was amazing. Like it's really sad that it's not still going.
And it launched a lot of careers.
Absolutely.
A lot of careers. But the day after the finals, they uploaded it onto YouTube.
They did, and because Tropfest was such a big like entity back then, it was like anybody that like missed it or like wanted to watch the films could. So I think the next day maybe like all of the films got like 20,000 views. which we were just like, oh my God, like 20,000 people like have watched your film in a day, insanity. And then what sort of happened, I think we just got very lucky, and there are, you know, kind of like granular reasons I could get into why I think this is the case. But effectively, over the course of about a month, the film got picked up by a bunch of like big pop culture websites that were around at the time. Some still are, some aren't, but like BuzzFeed, Upworthy, Short of the Week on Vimeo. Or Short of the Week and Vimeo staff. Like it was just a bunch of places that were like, hey, check out this thing. And I think because A, it was short, like it was a short film. B, it had like a genre thing to it. C, it had a bit of like an emotional punch at the end maybe that I think people were liking. And it just sort of became shareable in a way. And so like it took about a month, but I think eventually in a month in it hit like 1 million views, and we were like, you know, just so staggered that many people could have watched it. Because then it goes global, because those platforms, those Facebook pages or their Twitters or whatever they were sharing it on, they already have an inbuilt audience of like 20 million followers or people that like are following that. So you've got immediate exposure to all of these people. So.
And I think also because it's high concept.
Yes.
Do you want to explain what high concept means? Do you guys know what a high concept film is? Do you want me to explain?
Yeah, you go for it. I'd love to hear you explain it.
Right. A high concept film is really a film that in a way almost sells itself just in the premise alone.
Yeah.
That you immediately get it. There's some kind of irony involved, and it automatically kind of makes the audience want to watch. So I think in Cargo's case, a father who's been bitten by a zombie trying to get his baby girl to safety before he turns into a zombie himself and eats that child is I'm already, as an audience member, going, ooh, there's already stakes, there's an irony to it. I want to know more. I want to watch it. And obviously a lot of Hollywood films are high concept. So again, I think the fact that you had a high concept short is really pretty extraordinary.
In a way, if I'm honest, it was maybe an accident. Like, I think we were, like I was conscious of high concept films. Like I think, you know, you're aware that idea of like something that has or a hook. Another way to say it is like a film that has like a really strong hook. Yeah, I think there was a consciousness of like wanting to have a concept that was quite clear and kind of exciting, but then really it was sort of more about like, well, what's like the emotional story? Like, is there any meat on the bones of this thing?
I think that was so
and I don't mean this to be disparaging, but like another version of a high concept movie would be like Snakes on a Plane, right? Because the minute you hear that, you're like, I know what that is,
Cowboys
and I want to fucking watch
aliens.
it. But like, no shade, like that's such a fun movie. But it's sort of like, I think with this it was more about, okay, like we want to do something that has a bit of that, but that also has a little bit more emotional meat and drama going on.
I mean, I agree, and I think, you know, God knows there's a lot of not great zombie films out there, and well, we'll talk about the feature in a moment, but I mean, you know, I think the feature version of Cargo, it's probably the only zombie film I've seen where I bawled my eyes out.
Did you?
I absolutely did. By the end of the film, I was so affected by it emotionally. There's not too many zombie films that do that. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
So it went viral, and you had some pretty amazing people share it.
Yes.
Like Simon Pegg.
Yes, the short film,
Yeah, the short film.
He did, yeah. Yep. That was wild.
You guys know Simon Pegg? He made Shaun of the Dead, another great zombie film, comedy.
It was high praise.
Yep.
I mean, I think there's something to be said there about like the shareability, and that it does become a thing of like people seeing your work, or you like finding your collaborators by people like minds coming together and that kind of thing. Because ultimately it was the feature that got us the job on Haunting of Bly Manor. Was that the creator of that show was a fan of the feature version of Cargo. So you just never quite know. Yeah, you never know where things might land.
So what was the process after you had this amazing short that had found this success? did you always have a feature in mind, or what was then the process of adapting your short into a feature?
No, we didn't. And I think it's interesting, the irony is that I think Cargo's sort of been used as an example of a proof of concept. And I can see why, and I think
Sure.
it does appear that way, but it's sort of like that was retrospectively the case. It wasn't. And I think it's because at the time we made it as well, you know, like the likelihood that you would make effectively like one short film, and and then people would be like reaching out being like, hey, do you want to make a feature film? Like the chances of that happening are pretty slim. Like it doesn't happen that way quite often. And I think we just had it in our heads that we would be, you know, hustling, making a whole slate, like a whole, you know, a number of short films under our belt and a number of festival births and all of that stuff to try and like build up a bit of a reputation as filmmakers before we would ever get that chance. So as surprising to us as anybody else.
So who reached out and how did that happen?
It was one of those like ludicrous situations where a big agency from the States just one day woke up with an email in the inbox from an agent at a big US agency. And it was kind of funny because our cinematographer on the short film, Dan Folds, who's an amazing DP, and he was telling us about some guys that he knew who had Aussie guys who'd made something that had gone kind of viral, and suddenly, you know, they had a big agency in their inbox the next day, and we just thought, you're like, ha, how amazing, good for them, never happens, and then it did happen, and we were like, oh my god. And yeah, I mean, I think it was just one of those things where it wasn't like we want to represent you, but it was basically like, we love what you've done. If you've got any feature stuff that you'd like to pitch, if you can fly yourself over to LA, we can put you in some rooms to have some meetings to pitch it. So it was sort of like,
wow.
Yeah, it was like an opportunity to get in the room, to kind of like talk about your ideas. And of course, at that point, we shit ourselves because we were like, no, we don't have any feature ideas, because we thought we'd be making short films for the next 10 years and be broke forever. And so, but I think, you know, like we pretty quickly, I think what we realized quite quickly was that what we did have with the short film, we wouldn't have used these terms, but like we had a proof of concept. We had a snapshot of what a feature version of that thing could be. And so we knew enough to not be like going in and pitching a broad comedy. It's like, well, this is what we've made. This is what they're responding to. We're going to do something that's like tonally like in that pocket. And then again at that time, because the zombie stuff was not as kind of prevalent as it is now, we just thought, well, is there any more mileage in this idea? Like if we were to stretch it out over 100 minutes, would that work? And what if the short film was effectively the first act of a feature film with a little bit of the ending, and we move that over here, like what would that look like? So that was sort of that's what we went over with. So we developed like a treatment document before we went, which was sort of like an outline of what we kind of imagined a feature length version of that was, and then we got in those rooms and had the meetings, and were lucky enough to kind of come away from that trip with American producers attached to developing that with us, which we did for, you know, like probably 6 months or so, worked on refining that treatment and getting that to a point where we were like, this feels right. And then I went and wrote the first draft. And this was all like on spec, so like all, you know, no money,
no pay.
You're just sort of doing that to, you know, get the thing done, and that was sort of how that ball got rolling, essentially. Yeah, it was bizarre.
Once you had a first draft, what was the process then? Because obviously there's still a whole lot of steps between a first draft and going into production.
Yeah, I think probably with my perfectionist brain, it ended up being probably a bit more like a second draft.
Sure.
And so Ben and I were talking about this earlier about how we're both like perfectionists and trying to get the thing right before we share it with anybody. But effectively what happened with that is we shared the finished, sorry, not remotely finished, but we shared that draft with the American producers. They were very positive about it, and then at that point it was very clear that it was going to be like a distinctly Australian film. It was going to be set here, it was going to be shot here, and so they quite rightly were like, okay, well, we're going to need boots on the ground in Australia, we're going to need producers in Australia to also come on board to like lead the producing side of it.
Yep.
And what just worked out really well for us at that time was Causeway Films, who I'm sure you guys would have seen, The Babadook, Talk to Me, all sorts of incredible films that team have made. So they had just done The Babadook. It had just been this big smash
Huge.
at Sundance.
Yeah.
And the American producers shared the script with them, and they really...
Which also, The Babadook also started as a short film.
It did.
And
Amazing
became
short
a
film.
feature.
Yeah.
And did really well.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No, well, yeah, I was just going to say that they came on board, basically. So then
Right.
from that point, Causeway were they were our producers that like really led the charge. Christina Seaton and Sam Jennings there. And then it was just, further rounds of development. And at that point, we entered the, any kind of like independent filmmaking, you're looking for avenues to try and make money or like look at ways to get a thing off the ground. And so at that time we submitted the script to Australians in Film, had a Gateway LA, which was like a screenplay competition, like a script competition.
Do you guys know about Australians in Film? They're an amazing resource. If ever you're in Los Angeles, they're an incredible resource for Aussies who are based in the States or are traveling to the States for any reason. They put on screenings regularly of films and TV shows starring Australians or that have Australian creatives involved.
You guys probably do know them if you're aware of the Heath Ledger Scholarship.
Yeah, the Heath Ledger
They
Scholarship.
run that. That's their thing.
Yeah, which is extraordinary. And they have an office in LA now that is Charlie Chaplin's old
That's right. Yeah.
house or production office or something like that.
Yeah.
That they will host Australians for a week or two.
Yeah.
If you're there, you can go and take meetings there. You could you could have a writer's room there, all kinds of things. You should follow them on Instagram if you're not already.
They're great.
Yeah, so you went over with Australians in Film?
Well, they did and I hope they get to do it again. They, at that time, this is, I want to say, 2015 maybe, they were running something called Gateway LA, which was effectively the Heath Ledger Scholarship for screenwriters. And Cargo, we threw that in there, and amazingly it won that year.
Amazing.
And so that helped us as well, just in terms of like, it gave me a little bit of money to be able to keep working on it, and developing it.
What did you do in LA on that trip?
Well, initially I don't think I went over until they did sort of their awards ceremony
great.
thing. So it
Yeah.
was more like, but it was great. I mean, it was like they're doing such cool stuff. But yeah, it just sort of went from there till we got to the point where we felt the script was ready to then do all of the sort of business side things in terms of the financing, looking at sales agents, how are we going to put the money together, working with Screen Australia to apply for production financing and all of those sort of steps, and what is happening at the same time, because financing and casting are so intertwined, for better or worse. Is that you're trying to, attach a lead actor to that project in order to help the financing kind of fall into place.
What a learning curve.
Oh my God, yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, I guess we're at that point now where I have to ask, how did you approach Martin Freeman? How did he end up becoming attached to the film?
Like in the most typical way you can imagine, really. Like
Yeah.
it was kind of, the script got sent to his agent. His agent, very luckily for us, really liked it and liked it for him. But I remember her saying though, she was like, I really like it, but he doesn't usually go for these types of things, but like, let me pass it on. So I think when she said that, our expectations were pretty low, because we were like, okay, that's probably a long shot. And for whatever reason, he liked it enough to be open to having a conversation about it. And then Ben and I jumped on a call with him, which was surreal. And I remember doing it like in the backyard of my housemates here who lived with me in this basically a crack shack. And I remember having to be like, where am I going to do this insanely important phone call with this incredible actor and try and convince him that we're, legitimate. And having to go out into the car in the backyard and just sort of try and do the phone call out there. So had a call that was lovely. And then it was sort of the anxious wait of sort of, will he or won't he? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of was a process. He attached to the project at that point, which was like the greatest thing that had ever happened to us. It was so exciting.
Did you always know, at what point did you go, Martin Freeman's the guy?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think initially, again, it's that thing of just being like, we couldn't possibly dream so big. Like it was,
right.
you know, so I think also initially because we were like, it's such an Australian film, of course we went down the path of like, well, it's going to be an Australian actor.
Yeah.
And it's so disheartening and kind of like really boring that like, there's only a handful of Australian actors, and bless them because they're all fucking brilliant, but they're also booked for like the next 20 years in advance and you're never going to get them. And so there's that really boring financing part of the puzzle where it's like, these are the names that we think we could then justify giving you however much money this movie is going to require to be made. And it's a very short list when you're talking about the lead roles.
Yeah.
And you know, we looked at a couple people on that list and went down a couple of paths and then, you know, inevitably kind of realised that they're not available or it's not for them or whatever it is.
Right.
So we did do that with a couple of people, Australian people before. And then when we were looking at the UK side of things, I mean, I was such a big fan of Martin's work, and when that became a possibility, to even have that conversation or to even send it to him, like that was a pretty clear choice.
Did you float the idea, or did somebody float his name?
Well, I think it's one of those hilarious things where like absurdly arbitrary lists happen, where it's sort of like agencies are like, all of these people, and you go, all of them? And they're like, no, only actually these people, but we won't tell you that until you've said that you want them, and no, they're not available. Like, it's so silly. And then like there'll be other things where you're like, that guy, really? Like he had like one line on Game of Thrones, and then the next week he's not on the list, and you're like, what do you mean? Like none of it makes sense. It's all garbage. But basically, yeah, he was on our list and very high on our list. And so, yeah, it was a pretty easy thing to be like, once everyone was on board, to be like, yeah, let's go in that direction. It was let's shoot our shot and try. But I don't think none of us really thought it would happen.
Had he read the script or watched the short before you met with him?
He definitely read the script. I'm not sure. He probably watched the short, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But he definitely read the script. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which in itself, like truthfully, you know, would have been a win. Like, you know, to
thrill.
walk away and be like, an actor of that caliber read something that I wrote.
Yeah.
Was a pretty amazing thing. And like, even if it was just like even if he thought about it for a moment, it would have been like, you know, when I was talking about earlier about this idea of you just looking for those little moments where you're like, oh, I'm just like, maybe I am on the right path. That was definitely a big one.
And so you got the news that he was agreeing to do the film.
Yes. And so the way that kind of works, they call it like attaching to a script. So like, it's basically like they want to do it, and then it's a question of, will the money fall into place? What are the dates going to be? You have those conversations about like availability and everything beforehand, but there's always things that are unforeseen. And so, for example, actually on this project, about 6 weeks probably before maybe it was 2 months before we were looking to shoot, he'd been attached to the project for a number of months, and we weren't too far away from like looking to move into pre-production, and he had to pull out. And so we lost him. Like, it was sort of like there was a schedule clash and
I didn't know that.
Personal stuff, and like whatever was happening, he was so gracious about it and really kind and sent a lovely email in it. But it was so heartbreaking because then as a writer, I'd spent the next number of drafts writing it with him in my head. Like, you're writing it in his voice and you're imagining him doing it and like
tailoring it.
Yeah, you're tailoring it, and that becomes the dream idea of what the film will be. And so when that went away, it was because also this is where a lot of films fall over. Like, there are versions, and I don't say this to like be melodramatic about it, but like, what can sometimes happen is a film loses their star and it never gets made because they just can never scramble to get someone else to step in that is of that caliber to hold the financing
together,
and it can fall apart. And so there was a very real possibility that could happen. And so then it was like back to the drawing board of like, well, who else could we, you know, and so you go down that path of trying to think of who else.
And for those dates, were those dates set in stone?
The dates could probably have moved a little bit,
Right.
but there's sort of like, you know, limitations on like Screen Australia's funding windows and when you know, like you're allocated money for this window. And if you're not going to use it, then they want to be able to give it to someone else, which totally makes sense and all of that sort of stuff.
Right.
But look, I guess at the end of the day, like, thankfully, they were able to find a way, and he was able to find a way to kind of make it work. So we were able to keep him, but it also meant that we had to shoot sooner than we would have otherwise.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a scramble, but you kind of do the math in your head and kind of go, well, it's worth it. If that's what it means, it's worth making it work. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there were many tears shed.
Were
Much
there?
fetal position on
I'm
that day.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a blow. Yeah.
How long was that period between him saying he was unavailable and coming back
I reckon
home?
it was like maybe as long as a month.
Right.
Like, yeah, it could have been as long as a month.
Enough time to really sweat it out.
Oh, yeah.
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 Wow. And so then all of a sudden you're going into pre-production and into production. Had you directed anything else between the short and the feature?
No.
And what was that like? I mean, that's a big jump. And
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, huge jump. It's kind of like, it's a really like laboured analogy, but if you think of like the idea of like short filmmaking is like you've got a speedboat and it's like, it's very easy to be like, we're going to change direction, we're going to go over here because there's only as many people that can fit in the speedboat, so you can be pretty deft with it.
Yeah.
And then you step up to a feature film that has like real money behind it and like big cast, big actors, obligations, and suddenly it's a cruise ship and you're like, oh God, I don't know how to drive this thing. Like it is, it was a baptism by fire, not to like mix my metaphors at this point, but it was extremely challenging. And like in hindsight, like we were not like ready for it, but I also have kind of taken heart that like I think a lot of people that I respect speak about this idea of like you'll never be ready,
Right.
and it is in some ways better to leap when you're not, because that's where the growth happens. And like, look, there's many things that I look back on with that project that I can beat myself up about and wish I'd done better and wish I knew more and wish, you know,
Sure.
I'd approached different things in different ways. But, you know, you are where you are. You are where you are at when you step into those kinds of things. But yeah, it was a massive undertaking, and I was very fortunate that I had, you know, Ben by my side as my co-director, like working together to have two brains in that process.
And how did you and Ben meet, and how did you guys end up collaborating?
Yeah, we'd met on a show that we were both working behind the scenes on a number of years before, and we'd been friends for quite a while, and we'd been working individually on things. And then because the cargo short that we'd co-directed and kind of came up with the premise together, that it was sort of, then we were seen as a team in a package deal, and we were quite okay with that. We were like, great, sure, if this is like, you know, it worked really well on the short, we're friends, like let's see where this goes. Yeah, let's share the load. And it was a really fortunate, it was an amazing thing to kind of, you know, have someone in the kind of trench with you for that process. And also I absolutely cannot speak more highly of like the team at Causeway, Christina and Sam, our producers on the project, who were so supportive.
Yeah.
And really just like the whole team. We had some pretty like wild things to contend with in terms of just the logistics and insane weather and all sorts of crazy things, and a cast that were amazing and totally like up for it. But also it's one of those things where, and this would be my advice to you, would be to like, if you're going to do your first film, maybe don't cast a 10-year-old that's never acted before and a baby as two of your lead characters. And maybe don't have a whole section of the film set on the water and have fire and stunts and all of this insanity, night shoots, like insane things that are just like, you know, in hindsight, what were we thinking? Like it was so stupidly ambitious.
It's interesting to me, you know, when I was at film school, in my cohort of directors, I always felt like every director had their own strength, or they had their own background. Some came from VFX, or some were editors, and then there were a couple like me who were actors. And I guess you were also coming from an acting and writing background. What did your experience as an actor offer you as a director, and how much did you kind of use what you knew about acting to step into this huge role as a director?
That's a good question. It's interesting. In a way, I feel like what training I had done as an actor, in some ways, maybe more informed the way I approached the script, or that there was a lot of thought about character and backstory and emotion and beats, and like really trying to shape and craft scenes from that perspective, and also maybe then zooming out and trying to look at it as an actor and how you would break it down and what you would be looking for as an actor. So it probably informed the script more than anything, and then it certainly gives me like a sense of extreme appreciation and respect for the craft of acting. And so when you're on a set with actors, that idea of giving them space to do what they do, and like I just have so much respect for that craft, because it's such a vulnerable thing to put yourself in that position. And it was really refreshing to see, you know, actors. We had Susie Porter on that shoot, we had Anthony Hayes, we had David Golpalil, Natasha Wanganeen, like we had some incredible actors working with us on that project. And it was reassuring to see that, like, in service of trying to do their best work, they weren't always sure, you know, like there's insecurity, we all have insecurity, we're all trying to figure it out. And that was really humanizing, and it lowers the pedestal a bit. Like at a certain point, you know, there's part of your brain that's still like, oh my God, like that's that person who I loved when they did that thing. But at a certain point, you're all just like in the muck trying to figure it out. Exactly. Yeah. So I think more than anything, it was just sort of like just a respect and appreciation for what they were going through and what they were trying to do, and trying to be sensitive to that. And but also again, when you're working with people of that caliber, there's also not needing to know when to get the hell out of the way. Like just be like, they know what they're doing. I'm not gonna like force myself into this scenario just to feel like I need to say something when you don't, when there's nothing that needs to be said. It's knowing when to shut up as well, I think, a little bit, or step back maybe. That's really interesting to hear. What was it like directing Martin Freeman? Like, surreal, like bizarre. And again, I think he didn't need much direction, and I think that's the thing. Like when an actor comes prepared, is that good? When he or she, when you come prepared, when you've been doing it as long as he has, I don't think he really needed much direction. There were maybe only a couple of points where it was ever like coming in and having a conversation about what we were kind of doing or talking through things, but.
Was there any rehearsal period?
Not really, no, we didn't rehearse. There was a little bit of pre-time, more for Martin to get to meet Simone Landers, the young actress that was the 10-year-old child, and their characters develop quite a strong bond across the course of the film. And that was an interesting thing as a director as well to kind of wrap your head around. We had a really great acting coach come in the pre-process, who helped us develop a language for how to work with Simone in terms of levels of intensity and just ways to work with kids in language that they could make sense of.
That's great.
Yeah, so there was that aspect of it, and then I also want to give credit to Martin in terms of like his own initiative to kind of like build that relationship with her and sort of in a way guide her through some of those scenes. Again, in a way that as a director, you're like, I'm gonna sit back here because I can see something's, I think for both Ben and I, you sit back a little bit because you can see something's happening there between them, and that they know they're figuring it out. Right. And to bring another voice in is not conducive in this moment. So let's see what happens. And I can't think of a single situation where those instincts were not like on the money, you know. Wow. So, yeah.
I really recommend checking it out. It is a very emotional zombie film, and I don't say that lightly. I was so moved by it.
Thanks, mate.
And just an extraordinary achievement, like for a first feature. How incredible! What a debut. After this, the film premiered at Tribeca. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Amazing. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, at that point, we kind of knew that Netflix were on board to release it. And this is, going back to like 2018. Yeah, so it was cool because we kind of knew that it was going to go to Netflix and that it would be able to reach a lot more people than it would otherwise.
Right.
And that was really exciting. And then the Tribeca experience, I mean, I think the dream of any like filmmaker is that at least initially that your film gets to be seen on a big screen. Like the dream is to have that experience, and we got to have that at Tribeca. And it's like, it's New York, and it's a whole thing. It was amazing. It was really exciting, and it went down really well. And then I guess something we weren't sort of super conscious of as well is like, you know, what happens after those things is like, you know, the reviews go out basically immediately after your screening.
And the reviews were amazing.
They were very generous, yes.
They were amazing.
A big relief. Yeah, we got some really nice feedback on the film. But yeah, it's very buzzy, and there were a lot of other great films at the festival. And you know, you're at like the welcome dinner and sitting there at the table, and like you look up and like it's like Robert De Niro walking out onto the stage to be like, welcome to Tribeca, and does his little spiel and then like runs the hell out of there. But even then you're like, it was like in the presence of greatness for like, you know, 2 minutes. But yeah, it was
and Martin was there too.
Martin was there. Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah,
right.
That was really lovely.
And how did Netflix come on board? Did they come on board before you made the film or after Tribeca?
So they actually came in the middle of post.
Oh wow.
So our producers took, they went to, I think it was the AFM, the American Film Market.
Yeah.
They took the film, they took a trailer that had been cut from, because we were still editing the film at that point, they took a trailer based on the footage that we were working with and the script to the American Film Market, and they were trying to, you know, look at selling it to other territories. And Netflix came in at that point based on a trailer and the script and offered to buy. And what that meant, and that was the decision then that you have as a team, you know, with your producers, is sort of like there's two options. It's sort of like you have the Tribeca screening, and we knew we were going to get a sort of limited Australian cinema run. The other avenue you can take is to then try and, you know, like sell territory by country by country, basically, to try and get it in cinemas around the world, and then hope that you get it. You know, at this time, Blu-ray and DVD was still happening. Well, it was probably starting to decline, but it was still a relatively useful, like, auxiliary way of the film making money. But I think what we realized, this was sort of as Netflix was really like just starting to ramp up. What we realized was like the point of making something for us was for it to be seen, and you're going to, you know, Netflix at that time, they have so many more now, but back then it was like 190 countries and like, I don't know, 100 million subscribers. They have way more than that now, but it was a lot of eyeballs.
Right.
And it was a very easy decision to be like, well, the priority is to have this thing be seen. Like, we just want as many people to have access to watch it as possible. And so it was in the end, it was a pretty easy decision to kind of go with them. And they very, you know, fortunately for us, were cool with us also having the festival premiere as well. So yeah, it kind of was the best of both worlds.
And I mean, and what an honor and what a thrill for Netflix to make it their first original Australian Netflix film. Yeah,
so it was the first, I guess, it was the first, I guess, narrative feature, because Kitty Green's, is it called The Killing of John Benet Ramsey?
Okay.
There's a really great doco feature that had sold to Netflix before us, but yeah, effectively, first like scripted feature,
incredible.
Yeah.
You've had this incredible success. What happened next? What was the journey between Cargo and The Haunting of Bly Manor? How did Mike Flanagan come to see the film? Did he reach out to you? How did all of that come about?
I think he tweeted. Actually, he did. He tweeted about the film.
Right.
And that was brought to my attention, and I was a huge fan of The Haunting of Hill House. It's just such an extraordinary piece of television.
So good.
It's so cinematic.
And so is Bly Manor. I mean, they're both
I
extraordinary.
have a real soft spot for Bly Manor. Yeah, but I think he's just such a genius brain. Like, he really is, and the people that he works with are amazing. And I think literally that was just it's one of those really funny things that sometimes happens, there's no accounting for it, but it was just sort of, he did a really nice tweet about the film, I replied, we had like a little exchange, and then I think this is where this is like an example of like the good part of social media as opposed to the absolute, calamity of social media. But I think I reshared the tweet, and our American agent at the time saw this and did his agent brain thing and was like, oh, like he happened to know that Bly Manor was looking to crew up, that Mike wasn't going to direct all of Bly Manor, which he did on Hill House, that he was going to bring in other directors to direct a block of episodes each. So there'd be multiple directors on the second season. And so he did a bit of the Cupid matchmaking thing and reached out to the producers on that and were like, would you consider meeting with Ben and Yolanda to kind of talk about this? And they amazingly, they were like, they're already on our list, and that was sort of already in the works, I guess, to some degree.
Wow.
But it was literally, it ended up just being, at that time, it was a Skype call with Mike and Trevor, his producing partner, to just talk about the project. And that was a really nice call. And then it was maybe a month later. And it was this is like one of those really funny LA things where it was like, I think our agent just sent, it was like a one-line email. It was like, basically like, they loved you, it's happening, be back in a minute. And we were just like, like what? It was just so like, we've got a million other things to do today, so just letting you know, you got the job, basically. And it was just like, what do you mean?
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. It was amazing.
And then you went to Canada to shoot it, and then what was that like to suddenly be on a really big budget Netflix series, and you directed 2 episodes?
Dude, yeah, it's still maybe the most enjoyable job I've had to date, and I think that's for a number of reasons.
Well, the episode, one of the episodes you directed too had some just incredible cinematography, and
we had a great DP,
like some incredible sequences.
I think it's that thing of like that was a step up again in a way. Like we hadn't done television before, but effectively we did 2 episodes, and the way that you shoot, usually in TV you do blocks of 2 episodes. If it's multiple directors, you usually do them in 2 blocks. And what that essentially means is that, as actors, you're shooting completely out of order. So, we did 6 and 7. So our actors would come in for the day and our crew would come in for the day, and they, in that same day, would be shooting scenes from 6 and 7 in no order. And so obviously there's a huge amount of, mental kind of arithmetic that you're doing to keep track of where you are in that situation. But yeah, it was kind of amazing. It was a bizarre, it was one of those things where we just sort of like we had the 2 episodes, we effectively had the same budget that we had for Cargo for each episode. So it was like you had all the toys to play with.
All the toys.
All the support. It was one of the most supportive, and Cargo was very supportive, but for a big network show, it was really, we really had like an amazing, there was a real sense of like, you were looked after, I guess.
And just an extraordinary cast.
The cast are insane, yeah, they were great. And a lot of them had come back to work with Mike. So they'd been in Hill House and were coming back to play new roles in the new show. So it was like an anthology series.
Victoria Pedretti, that
Victoria was in it, from Hill House.
Who's also in You, if you guys know her.
Yes. In You. Henry Thomas.
Yes,
who's amazing. Oliver Jackson Cohen's amazing. Kate Siegel, like a lot of these guys you'll just repeatedly work with Mike because he likes to work with the same.
I'm really curious. I guess at this stage now you've worked with Martin Freeman and Susie Porter and then this incredible cast at Netflix and Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
What lessons did you learn from working with some of these people? Particularly, I guess maybe we'll start with the actors. Was there anything in particular that you took away about watching these actors and their process on these big productions?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you say that, it actually takes my memory back to this completely different scenario where one of my earliest jobs as like a 22-year-old or something in the costume department, which I never thought I would be in, but was on like Baz Luhrmann's Australia.
Oh, wow.
And I have a really distinct memory of being on set doing costumes. When I say doing costumes, I mean like helping put dirt on costumes and then like holding blankets because it was freezing for like the extras. Like I was in the extras department, which was incredible, so fun. But like in terms of like witnessing process and stuff, like I have a really distinct memory of that being the first, like, it's only the second set I'd ever been on, and it was it was so massive in the scale of like anything
Huge.
that like globally, like anything, any Hollywood movie, it would be massive. It was like Gone with the Wind, like extravaganza, but certainly like to be something that we would make here. And I have a really clear memory of like, it was a very emotional scene that Hugh Jackman had to like come up to this burning building and like have this emotional meltdown. And even just like as a little like baby, like wannabe writer director over in the corner, like watching what he did and sort of like giving like how he was given space or took space for himself and didn't give a shit. Like he was off in the corner like screaming and like running between the trees and beating his chest and like doing whatever he needed to like get himself into that emotional state. And I think yeah, I mean, but I guess in terms of like being on set as a director, I think I'm still learning that in terms of how best to work with actors, because every actor's different and they need something different from you, or they respond to different things. Some like to be left alone, some like to have their hand held a little bit more. Yeah. I think in many ways I've got a lot to learn on that front as well in terms of like how best to kind of navigate that. But I think, you know, more than anything, I guess at the times that, you know, the sets that I've been on as a director has also been in a directing relationship with Ben and I as co-directors.
Right.
And so for us, it was very much about like, we need to be a united front. We cannot be giving conflicting notes. It's like we are one brain and an answer from one of us is the same as an answer from the other. Like it's that thing.
Was that tricky to navigate?
No. I mean, occasionally we'd have we'd confer at the monitor, but like mostly you try and do as much of that in your pre as you can, so you both know what it is, what you're trying to do. Yeah. And there might be a small thing where an actor will do something that you're like, oh, do we want to try it a different way, or do we like that? Like there's something that you're responding to in the moment, but you're just trying to be as kind of prepared as you can be. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, you learn something from like every set that you're on and everybody that you're kind of working with, I think.
Just to kind of go back into the story of your career so far. After Bly Manor, how did Troppo come about for ABC?
So that had been in the works before Bly, I think, and it was one of those things that, again, it's like these things of like you just don't know, you meet people along the way and they pop up in your life in ways that you aren't expecting. So when Cargo won the Australians in Film prize, the person who at the time was the chair of Australians in Film, who was also a development executive at different companies, really liked the script and kept me in her mind. And then the company she was working for had optioned a novel that they were looking to adapt called Crimson Lake by Candice Fox, which is what Troppo ended up becoming. And yeah, she sort of effectively was like, we bought this book, we really like it, do you want to read it, see if you like it, maybe you could sort of help us come up with, basically they were looking for someone to write like a series bible and a pilot script. And then those conversations eventually became like, would you like to stay on and be the sort of creator of the show and like sort of head up the writing team? And yeah, so that was a long play game. Like that was sort of over again, like kind of like a 3-year, maybe longer. It was quite a long process.
Yeah. Of developing that show. But initially too, ABC, having made Cargo, having made Bly Manor, were initially like, well, we're not sure about you directing episodes. And then was that something you had to fight for?
It probably wasn't so much. I mean, I think initially it wasn't so much about the director. I remember early days off the back of Cargo, there was sort of a meeting that we'd had with someone at the ABC who was sort of maybe of the view of like that we could direct a web series but like not an actual series, and it was a bit like, you just made a feature that's done okay. That seems a bit odd, but like it was and then it was a number of years later that, or not like probably like a year and a bit later, 18 months later, that the kind of the Troppo stuff happened, and it just sort of happened to be at a moment where they were sort of looking probably for something in that crime space as they kind of tend to be drawn to, and it was the thing for them. And that was a really kind of amazing experience for me to get to have that sort of challenge of taking a novel and adapting someone else's material, which was not my own, and like that's its own challenge in terms of figuring out what that is and what part of that is you and what part of that's the author, and how you try and like meet in the middle And then there's so many voices in that process as well in terms of networks and all of that sort of stuff. So it was, it was kind of yet another like very steep learning curve, you know, another big cruise ship that you're sort of trying to learn how to drive, that you're like, I kind of thought that maybe I was starting to get a handle on how to drive that cruise ship, and now this is, the controls are different over here. Like I don't know how to use this one. So it was interesting. It was
how much of season 1 did you direct?
Ben and I co-directed the last 2 episodes.
Yep.
It was like an 8-episode show, so we did the finale and the penultimate, which was great. But and kind of like, I mean, even that was a stretch because as sort of the kind of head writer on the show, and I had a great team of writers around me, an amazing script producer named Jane Allen, who was like, you know, really by my side the whole time. Yeah, that was sort of like as much as I think my sanity could take on in terms of wearing multiple hats on something that's moving that fast, because TV moves very fast.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah.
And were you very involved in casting that show?
Yeah, yeah.
What was, I guess, we've got a lot of actors here. What was that like, I guess, from your standpoint as a creator of a show? Did you have a very clear sort of picture in your mind about who these characters were? Or were you surprised by what actors brought in auditions? What was that auditioning process like? Yeah,
I mean, I think you do when you're writing and when you've lived with these characters for like a couple of years, like you do have, it's not a specific actor in your head most often than not, but it's maybe there are certain qualities maybe that you kind of see that they could be. But I think for me, like, and this is not saying anything new, like I think anybody that's like, I would hope that's like about to cast a show or a film, like desperately want to be surprised. Like you desperately want someone to come in and be like, I would never have thought of that and I'm obsessed with it. And that actually did happen on Troppo, because I will say that like, you know, like we saw a bunch of really great actresses for the lead role in that show, but like never in a million years would I have pictured Amanda as having like a fully shaved scalp, and like it wasn't the image of her. It wasn't not the image, but it just wasn't what I expected. And it's so interesting too, because when you're looking at casting tapes that have come through from the casting director, and you can see all the little thumbnails like that are in the folder of like these are the people we think have submitted really great tapes, and some of them are known, a lot of them aren't. Like, and I think that's a really great thing, and that's what I like to see. Like as someone, and I was just having this conversation with a director friend of mine who works a lot in TV here too, and we were both sort of like so desperately excited about casting new faces. Like we're both very passionate about wanting to not just have the old guard in every show, you know, like let's get some fresh stuff going. So, and you know, to be fair, Nicole had done some things before, but she had been sort of pigeonholed in a certain kind of role. You know, as an Arab Australian actress, had kind of only been sort of put in a corner of like, you can play those roles, but you can't really play a female lead in a show that's not about that. And I think that was like something really interesting she was bringing to the table. But like, I just like, you see the thumbnails of all of your fabulous self-tapes that you submit. It's like, and I do remember like seeing all of these faces and being like, oh, they all look so cool. And then seeing this shaved head woman, and I didn't recognize her at all. I was like, I don't know who this person is, but like, it's one of those things too where you're like, oh, I really hope her tape's great, because I would have never thought of that approach to that character and what that is, but I really hope I hope she brings it, you know. And she really did, and it wasn't at all the version of her that we imagined. Did you then begin to tailor the role to her? I mean, I think when you get into the process of once you're sort of in the shooting process and you start to hear what they sound like, and you know, then I think inevitably you do. And similarly, you know, with the male lead in that show, who was Thomas Jane, an American actor that had come over, again, like Thomas is amazing, and we were so thrilled to have him. Like, he's amazing, and I'd seen him in so many things, and that was a huge get for us. But again, you're in a position of, you do need to have a name. Like, one of your main characters needs to have a name to get the financing and all of that jazz. But similarly for him, like, again, like, that character was never supposed to be anything other than Australian, but once you move past that list of names who could get it made, who are based in Australia, then you kind of, as a writer, have to think outside the box of like, okay, now I have to have a cop in Australia that's not Australian. That's really weird. But like, okay, like theoretically it could happen. But then you kind of go, well, British makes more sense, or like anything in the UK or kind of makes sense because we have a lot of that. But American, I think we were all like, oh, that just feels like it's not going to fit at all.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think it kind of really did, but not in the way that just not at all in the way that we would have expected it. But I think in terms of a lot of those supporting roles were filled out by actors that were up and coming.
Yeah.
Or maybe hadn't had their shot yet, and that was really exciting. And I think with season 2, which I was a little less involved in, but when I look at that as well, I think there's a lot of really fresh faces in that, which I think's really, exactly what we should be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. so glad to hear it. I'll throw it open to you guys. Does anybody have a question for Yolanda? Yeah, Ash.
All right. First of all, I'll say that I'm a massive Blood Man.
Yes.
Stuck up for it in some of the arguments. It's full house.
Fair. Yeah.
Reminds me of the show I watch all the time. And I know what episodes you did as well. Especially Hannah's episode. That was Mindfuck.
Oh yeah.
How long does it normally take to direct one episode?
I guess you know what the truth is, it depends where you're making the show and how much money there is. So with Troppo, as an Australian production, that was a pretty healthy budget for an Australian show. We had 8 days to shoot an episode, which is not a lot of time. Bly Manor, we had 10. That's much. It's still like for a show that's like that geared to be that cinematic is not enough time. It's never enough time, but is more achievable.
Also because you have a larger budget.
Yeah, you have a big budget.
It's that good, fast, cheap.
That's
rule.
it. Can never have all of the same thing. Exactly.
Yeah. Do you guys know that rule?
That's that sweet Netflix.
You can have 2 out of 3. You can't have 3 out of 3. You can have it's good, fast, and cheap. So you can have good and fast, but it won't be cheap. You can have cheap and good, but it won't be fast.
Yeah.
Or you can have fast and cheap,
but
it won't be good. Yeah. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
That's it.
So you had the budget to make it good.
Yeah, so 10 days an episode on Bly, 8 days an episode on Troppo, and then I guess, the comparison would be, I have an actor friend who's on Neighbours at the moment, and I think they do, fucking 5 episodes a week? Like an episode a day, basically. They're half hours, so it's like, whereas the shows that we were doing were like hour-longs, but, it just depends on what money you've got really and the format. That comes down to whether the network will let you have a bit of fluctuation with the length, but ultimately the budget will be the same for each block will have the same budget, and then it's up to the network to allow you to maybe go a little bit longer on one episode or a bit shorter. Back in the day, broadcast TV would be very strict. And that was because you were working around ads. So, we'd have the ad break, so everything had to be however many, minutes, because they had to slot ads in. They're not beholden in the same way now, but I think a lot of traditional broadcasters still have a certain, a fixed idea of what their time limits are for each episode.
Damien.
Yeah.
With the short film for Cargo,
yeah.
Did you then go to look at entering into any other festivals?
We did. We did, yeah. So Tropfest had a thing, I can't remember, there was sort of you kind of had to sort of ask them permission, I think, initially to do that, and then they were cool with it. And so yes, we did. We played at a bunch of other, some were I think we played at St Kilda, we played at, I think maybe LA Shorts Fest, a few other Academy accredited ones around the world. But some of those want a world premiere, and in those cases you're eliminated, well not eliminated, but you're not eligible because you've already screened. Yeah, so we sort of had to look at the ones that were that didn't require a world premiere, but could be an American premiere or a European, exactly. Yeah, but we did. I think there were maybe 10 festivals in the end that we maybe played at, I think. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jess.
With your AIF connection,
Yeah.
were you part of Untapped, or did you just know them?
No, so that was pre-Untapped. Okay. Yeah, this was a minute ago. Again, it's probably 2015, so it was before that program. But I mean, it looks like they're doing amazing things with that. And I think they're always looking at ways to kind of build out those pathways for talent.
They're a great resource. Yes.
Yeah.
Congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
When you're going back early days, moving
Yeah.
from acting into directing,
Yeah.
making that transition, building your team at those early stages, looking back at that now from working with all these going from the dinghy to the cruise ship, I guess.
Yep.
Looking back at the dinghy stage, how did you build that team? Are you still using some of those teams? I know you said with Ben.
Yeah.
But is it skill set over collaboration, or is it letting go of wanting to, I guess, control the stuff to letting other people with skill come in? Like, when does that transition sort of happen for you, I guess? Or
Yeah.
is that something that you feel you didn't need to do because you already had that team involved?
It's a tricky one. I mean, I think, and it's different for like everybody. Like, I think there are absolutely stories where like a short film team have been able to rise together and, you know, like transition into feature filmmaking as a squad that stays together. I think that can be trickier, and where that is probably more common is when the budget stays relatively low.
Yeah.
I think where it gets tricky is with, just in the example with Cargo, is we shot the short film for $5,000 over a 2-day weekend. And I will also preface that by saying that that again, this was like because I was working behind the scenes on other people's shows, that the DOP was the, camera assistant on this show I was working, who had relationships with gear houses, so we got significant budgets on the camera, like discounts on the cameras. So I want to be upfront about that. Like, we got a big budget, like a big discount on what we paid for those cameras for that weekend. But the difference when you're then looking at a film that's sort of, upwards of $5 million is, unfortunately, and it's not always the case, but like, unfortunately what happens is there are a lot of voices that then come into the mix in terms of like sales agents, financiers, all sorts of things that, like, in this case, they look at Ben and I as first timers and they go, oh, we're already worried about you guys, so we need to surround you with like as much experience as possible. And I think there's merit to that, absolutely, but I also think it's not always correct in the sense that sometimes experience, and I don't mean Cargo specifically, but I think just generally experience doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right person for that job.
Yep.
But there is an element of that does happen. I think maybe the way to like look at that as well is like, before you get into that process of like, we're going to make the thing together, is for her to maybe be having conversations with who those people are ahead of time, and like, it's almost like matchmaking people that share your sensibility and taste, and being like, maybe your daughter being like, I see this film as being a little bit like this film that exists in the world, whether it's like, whatever it might be. And sitting down with that person and being like, what are your favorite 10 films? What are your favorite 10 films? It's about sensibility, I think, and trying to find people that share a taste. I don't think any taste is right. It's just like, do we have the same taste? Because then I think that sort of trust is so much easier to give.
Totally.
Because you're not being like, they don't get me. It's like, no, they really get me. And so I can trust that you're going to do that. So like, and if it's like looking at a cinematographer, it's like looking at visual references of like, I like the look of this. Do you like the look of this? Because that's the look I want. Do you want to do that? Like, it's those kinds of creative conversations, I think. And then I think it's okay to also amicably be like, if you don't see it that way, that's okay, but maybe you're not the person for this project. Maybe I need to keep looking till I find the person that is going to have that sensibility.
I feel like I've had experiences where I've been overly loyal to certain people, and probably should have gone, maybe you're not the right person for this project. But then on the other hand, I've got some long-standing relationships with certain crew members who we now have a shorthand, and that's very useful and exciting, as I'm sure you and Ben do.
Totally, yeah.
Which is really useful too. So definitely, I would agree, there's no kind of hard or fast rule on that. But definitely having people that you feel like get you.
Yeah. But I also think it's kind of amazing that like your daughter's 16 and she's already that passionate about that. Like, that's really cool. The truth is, like, I think part of the journey initially is like, it's okay if they're a bit shit to start with, because everybody has to be a bit shit to begin with, right? And so like, it's okay if it doesn't look perfect. And also, more than anything, maybe I'm biased because writing is like my love, but I also think like the one, and I know Ben's nodding, I can see peripherally because I know that he agrees, but I think the most important thing is the script.
Yeah.
Above all, script. Unless she wants to be a cinematographer and it's the visual is her thing, and directing obviously is visual, but like, you know, story first, get that story dialed in, like put your time into that.
100%.
Because, you know, this is the thing, is like we've all seen movies that we're like, that looked incredible, and it was a pile of garbage.
But you don't remember it.
You
2
don't
minutes
remember it,
after.
yeah. Or you go like, it didn't make sense, or I
Yeah.
wasn't moved, or it wasn't funny, or whatever it is. It's like you can have all the tools at your disposal, and it doesn't mean a thing will be good. And also you can have no resources and it can be brilliant because the writer has like put all of their energy into
100%.
the script and taken the time to get it right.
It's amazing how much audiences will forgive
Yes.
if the story is good.
Yes.
You know, and it keeps you engaged, and it has something to say, and you know, I think someone said, if you can have a good script and average production values and you'll still have a good film. You can have great production values and a terrible script and you'll have a terrible film, or at least maybe an average film. I recommend film school.
Yeah, I wouldn't disparage
Later.
film school. I think if you're looking to do some tertiary study, like, I also think if she knows at this age, I think by the time she's 18, this passion has not dimmed, like that's what she wants to do. And so it's like, yeah, I do think there's merit in film school and finding your people and learning and
100%.
educating yourself. I think she will still learn a lot if she does that. But I also empower everybody here that like to not worry if you haven't done that. If you are interested in writing and directing,
100%.
there are incredible, you know, I'm sure you're already doing this, and I'm sure Ben's encouraging you to do this, but like find screenplays of the films that you love on the internet and read them and break them down, pull it apart, look at how they're doing it, watch the films that, like, figure out what films speak to you, watch them over and over, try and break it down, figure out what they're doing. There's so many other ways to like learn and educate yourself about this.
I love something that I heard Daniel Kaluuya say about how we stopped looking at who was above us or who was ahead of us and trying to, how do I, you know, knock on that door or get through that door. And he said we just started looking at who was around us, who wanted to work together, who wanted to collaborate, just as Yolanda and Ben did, and form those teams. And it is amazing how you do begin to rise together. Like Yolanda said, sometimes you know, it's amazing to have people who are more experienced than you. It's also wonderful to learn with people at the same time and come up together. And in my experience too, sometimes the people that I worked with early on, I would give a leg up to because I might have been a bit further ahead than they were at a particular point. Now some of those people are further along than I am because they're working on a lot more projects a lot faster than a director is, and now they're also giving me that leg up. So it's wonderful to begin to form that network and collaborate.
But yeah,
and one thing we're encouraging too is for you to come up with an idea for a short film that's under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it can be very ambitious to make something more than 10 minutes long. And as we have seen with Yolanda's short, with Cargo, that was 7 minutes. And if you can tell a story in 7 minutes, you're going to be really well placed and in terms of thinking economically, to tell a story in 90. And there's also less pressure. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 3-act structure, but also short films don't necessarily have to be 3 acts. They sometimes it might be just like a piece of that pie, or a slice of life that you might have a look at in a short film.
Yeah, I think under 10 minutes is useful, and what that actually translates to in terms of work is like 10 pages.
Yep.
So roughly a minute per page
Yep.
of screen time, so about a 10-page script. Yeah, I think it's good, and I think it's a useful, as Ben said, really great exercise creatively to have to think economically and how do I tell a story that can really pack a punch in a short amount of time. But I also think financially, in terms of a budget, trying to shoot a 10-page script you could do in 2 days, you could do it more affordably than, you know, if you're looking to shoot something that's sort of like 20, 30 pages, you're looking at adding many more days in terms of like trying to maintain the quality of the thing. So yeah, that would be my hot tip.
I'm a huge iconic fan.
Oh yeah.
And I thought live was perfectly splendid.
Oh my god.
It's so seamless though, the entire series, much like his other stuff. How much creative freedom did you have? Because you couldn't tell it's that different. I love those 2 episodes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question actually, because it is different when you as a director are effectively like a gun for hire stepping into somebody else's world and someone else's sandbox. And I think what was really useful was that like Ben and I were both very big fans of Hill House, so we loved that style that Mike developed for that show, and it kind of was in line with what we liked as filmmakers and the kind of stuff that we wanted to do. And so what we were talking about before of sharing a sensibility, like that was already in play. And then it was a case of like when you get there, you have these meetings. You have meetings with Mike, and he makes it, you talk about the look of the show, you talk about how he sees it. There's a bit of a style guide that you kind of talk about. So it's quite clear. And then we just did our own homework of like breaking down scenes in the first season and looking at how scenes were covered and the sort of like, different devices that he was using, and kind of tried to employ those. And in a way, like you're sort of still bringing your own flavor in terms of how you employ those things, and like you can add your own touches. It was never like militant in any way. He was very empowering, but yeah, it was kind of liberating as well, because like certainly for me as a writer, there's a level of like additional, that multiple hat wearing, that when you're on set, you're sometimes rewriting as you're directing and you're wearing multiple hats, and it can be like, it's so much to juggle. And there was something really freeing to like step onto something and be like, I don't have to even think about, like, obviously I need to break down the script in a similar way to as an actor that you do as a director, but it's all, that's set, and we only need to think about how to execute the vision of what this is. Yeah.
I love how different the fragmentation of Hannah's mind was in the scene cinematographically.
Yeah.
Graphically. Was that something that you guys informed?
In those episodes, so it's interesting what actually happened, and this is like, there was actually, if you look in the credits, there's a change of cinematographer as we started. And so the cinematographer that had been doing the episodes up till that point was one person, and then a new DP started with us and saw it the rest of the way through. So there was a little bit of a difference in the way that they approached it, and that might account for some of the visual aspects of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you're like coming in and directing, I think it was like 9 episodes and we did 6 and 7, so you're quite deep into the story at that point. And we just got very fortunate in a way as well that like the eps that we were assigned to direct were the ones where all the really exciting shit was kicking off. So we got to do like some of the really exciting stuff, which comes with its own pressures, but just sort of inherently meant that there was a lot of really exciting things that we kind of got to do. So yeah,
That's so good. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned that when you started off, you were doing a lot of costume design, sort of running and stuff like that. Do you have any tips basically for someone who wants to go into the background and running and eventually becoming a director, but like starting off, like, do you have any tips for that?
to be a company director, did you say? Like,
To be a director.
or to be a director? Yeah.
But definitely just to start getting on sets of movies and TV shows too.
It's a tricky thing to get that like first foot in the door, which is probably what you're experiencing at the moment. And I think in some ways that was where the film school thing did help, in terms of that first internship helped open that first door. I mean, I think in the first instance, maybe it's like, I don't know exactly where you're at in your career and like what you'd be willing and able to do time-wise, but like a first port of call would be maybe looking at film schools like AFTAs and other film schools like that, and reaching out to them to like offer your services as like a runner or in different roles to just get yourself on those sets, even if it's just short films to begin with. And I mean, I think even just starting in a short film space and particularly working with established film schools is a really great way to just get in on the ground level and in a way where you'll be like right in the thick of it. And it also might be a thing that like you're there and you see another department at work and go, oh, I'm actually really interested in what they're, maybe I want to look at that, like, and do that. I think that's probably the best way to get a couple of runs on the board for your CV, to be able to be like, I have been a runner on 3 short films at AFTAs. There's a bit of it's really boring, but there's a bit of a tick of approval that comes with that, where people go, this isn't somebody, this is somebody that's like doing the work. And so then you could look at maybe you could reach out to production companies, you could Google Australian production companies, there's a bunch of them that are always looking for, crew, and to try and reach out to them to send your CV through and ask for it to be kept on file, and see if they'll keep you in mind for any projects that they have coming up. I'm trying to think, do you have any other ideas about how to
there's a Facebook page.
Yeah.
Great. And so, putting your hand up there is great. I do think if you can even get on a short, often Damien's just gone to the bathroom, but Damien, who was just here, just directed his first short film, and he had a very experienced, for example, first AD on that project, and there was a guy that I put in touch with Damien, who said he wanted to do some work behind the scenes. He was on the film, he met that first AD, he met that art department, the art director, and both of them have said, contact me, because they're going on, they are working professionals, they're going on to bigger productions. Now they know that guy, and will take that call and consider him when they do have, for example, runner positions or art department positions on those other projects. So I think if you can just get in on anything, on any kind of short film, you're going to meet people.
But also I would say, don't be discouraged, because I know that even getting a runner job on something took me a hot minute, and you're like, why does no one want me? I'm so passionate and I really want to be there and I'll work really hard. Don't be discouraged, because it can take a minute to just find the in. And I think if directing is what you want to be doing, do you write as well? It's okay. Do you have any writers that you in your sphere that you like? Okay, so that's a relationship to try and build up as well. So maybe looking at other courses where you could meet writers, or you wanting to find like-minded people again that share your tastes. Because it's tricky as a director. It's one of those, kind of like an actor, you can be working on your craft, but it's you can't work until someone gives you, you could certainly make opportunities for yourself. It's trickier as a director because you need a script. So maybe that's another avenue to be thinking about, as well as trying to get in as a runner and get set experience, is to think about the second prong of that is how do I develop myself as a director? How do I learn to work with writers? That sort of thing, thinking about that.
You certainly don't have to be a writer
Not
and
at
director.
All. No.
It can help. When I was at film school, after I did directing, I kind of realized I wanted to know more about screenwriting. And then I stuck around for another 2 years and did screenwriting, because I just felt like it was only going to make me a better director anyway, but then put me in a position to be able to write stuff as well. So much of this is about your network, but I know that Aussies don't love that term networking, and I don't think you have to think of it as networking. It's really just making friends.
Yeah.
Just making friends with people. The best advice I heard on networking came from Tim Ferriss, who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, not a filmmaker, but he went to South by Southwest, which was a big music film tech festival in Austin. It's on right now. I went many years ago. It's 70,000 people arrive in Austin. He was there for the tech stuff, and he thought, I'm just going to try to network so I never have to network again. And what he decided to do was to not try to meet the most important person in the room, because everybody was going to be trying to meet that person, but just to focus on whoever happened to be sitting next to him at any given time, and just see if he could get to know them like they could become a lifelong friend. And there was a woman that he happened to be sitting next to in a Starbucks one morning having coffee, a middle-aged woman who had nothing to do with anything he was interested in, but they struck up a conversation. They chatted for 45 minutes and exchanged contact details at the end. They had a great conversation, and then they just kept in touch via social media and email, and 3 years later when it was time to get his first book published, it turned out her husband was in publishing. And she made that connection, and all of a sudden he had a book deal. So I've had that experience where, some of you know the story about me meeting a Jungian dream psychotherapist on a plane flying from New York to LA. I caught up with him a week later for a coffee because we just had this amazing conversation about Jungian dream therapy for 4 hours. And I was fascinated. And then a week later, we caught up for a coffee as I was meeting with managers and agents at the time, and it turned out he was like, well, before I became a Jungian dream psychotherapist, I used to be in casting. And I was like, oh, of course you. It was like the most LA thing you could hear someone say. But he made one phone call for me. And it's a kind of a longer story, but I ended up with my first manager in LA, an amazing manager, thanks to him. And I was not having a conversation with him about acting or about anything to do with acting. So I just think you never know. Like, the people in this room, you don't know who you're sitting next to or what they might be up to or who might have just won Best Short Film at Slam Dance. Like, there are people in this room who are up to stuff or making their first short film, a couple of weeks ago. And if you just start to make those connections and those friendships, you just don't know where they might lead you. And that's really exciting. There's one other thing I'd just say about your question before. I think just when you were talking about the 10 pages, and just to also, if you are thinking about doing this course or making a short film or whatever, I think Yolanda was kind of speaking to it before, but working within your constraints, it will only make you more creative if you let it. Mm-hmm. You might think that you need all this money and all of this time, and yes, money helps, no question. I think it was the most valuable lesson I learnt at film school was about, they actually got us to watch a Lars von Trier film called The Five Obstructions. Do you know it? Do you know it, Jeremy? It's an amazing documentary where Lars von Trier, who's a pretty out there filmmaker, challenged this other filmmaker who was his favorite director, who made a short film back in the 60s or 70s, but hadn't done a lot since and was feeling creatively stuck. Von Trier challenged this guy to remake that short film 5 times, but every time he remade it, he gave him another list of obstructions, like ridiculous obstructions. He'd be like, you can't have a shot in your film that is longer than 12 frames. We shoot at 24 frames per second. So he's saying you can't have a shot in this short that's longer than half a second. And you have to remake it. And you also have to do it in Cuba. And you also have to, just crazy obstructions. And every time this guy came back and delivered another masterpiece because he embraced the obstruction. Mm-hmm. And if you kind of think about, I know when I was at film school, often people would go, I'm going to make this amazing thing with all this VFX, and then they'd go into production and the thing would fall apart because they didn't have the resources to do it. But I think Yolanda's short is a really good example of working within those constraints. Okay, I've got $5,000. What can we do in a short amount of time? I've got, for me it was going, okay, I've got this amount of money at film school. I can really only afford one location. What can I do within that one location with really 2 characters? Because I don't think I've got the time to do anything more than that. How can I use that and make something that still keeps the audience on the edge of their seat? And, the film that I made did extraordinarily well, I think, because of those constraints. So, look around at who's around you. Sean Baker just won the Oscar for Anora, right, with a $6 million film. One of his earlier films was Tangerine, which he shot on an iPhone 12. It's an amazing film if you haven't seen it. Anything is possible. Are you planning to work overseas again?
I'd love to. I mean, if the opportunity arose, just kind of wait and see at the moment. I mean, I do have a new feature script that I'd like to take out, so that might, like, if I'm lucky and if things go well and people respond to it, might mean getting to go over and have some meetings if that's necessary. It's interesting though too, and I think that, you know, like, it's so much better to go and have the thrill of all of that and like be in the room and get to work a room and physically meet people in person is the best version of that. But I do also think that, like, there probably is, like, back when we did that, which was, you know, like 8 years ago, this was like pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, like things were very different. And so there, you know, now I think there's an element of Zoom isn't, you know, necessarily the way that you'd like to be having these meetings for the first time, but there is a kind of democratization of, like, of the industry, because it means it doesn't really matter where you are. And like, I have friends that are actors that were in LA for a number of years that are like, there's no reason for us to be here because we're self-taping everything. So why are we here in this Trumpian nightmare when we could be elsewhere and you know, still be submitting self-tapes and no one knows really where you are. So it's kind of not so much a necessity unless you're, you know, like being staffed on a show. And I get the feeling that pilot season is different now too. It maybe doesn't necessarily work in quite the same way. You don't have to physically be there.
Totally.
So it might, there might
There's
not
a
be.
new opportunity.
And then it's like, the thing is, like, if you get cast in the thing, they will help you make that happen to get you there because they want you, you know.
I guess just finally, Yolanda, what next for you?
Oh man, it is.
I know you're doing a lot of writers' rooms.
Yeah, a lot of writing, development stuff.
I feel like we've been at a similar stage. We were talking about it before in finishing features. What's the next step with this next feature?
I mean, hopefully, so it's just Ben and I were kind of consoling each other earlier today, just talking about the perils and the challenges of trying to write a film script, and we've both been working on these things, our separate material, for a very long time, and can be very inspiring and at times very defeating process, and you just got to kind of stay the course. But I guess with this, the hope, I just finished it like last week, and that's been like 2 years worth of, probably a third draft at this point, so it's been a hot minute of kind of really trying to, that's what I was saying before about like trying to get it the best possible version that it can be, and the hope is that maybe we can look to try and get a director that's further down the road than me to direct it, that, you know, might have a vision for it and be able to attract exciting people to the process. It's sort of it's new territory for me, because it's the first time I've written a script that I don't intend to direct and would like to see what another director brings to it, and that's really exciting. So it's just kind of that sort of really thrilling and absolutely anxiety-inducing period of like being like, here's my baby that I spent 2 years making, and just being like, hoping that someone likes it. Yep.
Well, Yolanda, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of this knowledge and your experience. And I feel very inspired by everything that you've achieved and everything that you're up to. And I'm sure you guys do too. So guys, please join me in thanking Yolanda Ramke.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out.
A pleasure. Watch Cargo. Watch the short. Watch the feature. And if you haven't checked out Troppo, check out Troppo. And of course, Bly Manor, which is extraordinary. And if you want more information about create your own short film, email us. Larissa will get our wonderful assistant Larissa, without whom none of this would happen. We'll get back to you with the details about that. So guys, thank you so much. We'll see you at the next one. Good night. Thank you.